They say a wedding is meant to be a crown upon love, a sacred seal that no hand should tear apart, a place where laughter rises like incense and where every whispered vow becomes eternal. Yet this one was different. The chandeliers glittered like frozen stars, velvet chairs lined the marble floors, gold-trimmed glasses clinked in hands too polished to know hunger. To the guests, it was flawless. To the family, it was the triumph of wealth displayed for the world to envy. But beneath the glow, silence was tightening its grip, a silence that waited like a shadow pressed against the wall, a silence that held a truth too heavy for the fragile glass of that banquet hall. And at the very center of it all stood Tasha, a bride whose smile carried grace, but whose heart carried scars. To them, she was the outsider, the poor girl, the burden, the woman unworthy of their son. To them, she was nothing but a stain upon their name. What no one in that hall realized was that the woman they branded useless would soon be the name whispered with trembling lips across boardrooms, banks, and newspapers. What no one imagined was that the one they mocked as poor was already holding a secret greater than the empire they guarded. Yet in that moment, as laughter echoed and champagne spilled, the first crack was forming. It began so quietly that no one turned their head, but when it struck, the floor itself seemed to tremble. You are about to witness the unraveling of a celebration, the tearing of veils, the exposing of wounds. But first, before we step further into this hall, tell me, where are you watching from? Don't stay silent. Don't slip into the crowd, because in this story, silence will cost more than you think. Type your city in the comments now. Where are you watching from? From the outside, everything was flawless. Elijah, the groom, looked every bit the prince. Polished shoes, a suit tailored sharper than glass, and a smile that fooled almost everyone. Around him, his family moved like royalty. Their presence dominated the room, their wealth dripping in every glance, every whispered judgment. Tasha, though radiant in white, could feel it. She wasn't welcome. She wasn't celebrated. Behind the polite smiles were whispers sharp enough to cut. She brings nothing. She will drain him. She's beneath us. The music swelled, glasses rose, laughter circled the hall, yet something in Elijah's eyes betrayed unease. It was there, a twitch, a hesitation, a restlessness he couldn't hide. And while the world saw perfection, the story was already bleeding underneath. Where joy should have been, unease was coiling tighter. Where unity should have risen, suspicion was beginning to take root. And Tasha, though surrounded by roses and diamonds, could already feel the thorns pressing against her skin. They called it love. They called it fate. And for a time maybe it was. The world saw their romance as a whirlwind, trips abroad, nights of candlelight, stolen kisses beneath city lights. To outsiders, Elijah and Tasha were unshakable, but love is rarely destroyed in storms. It is eroded in whispers, and Tasha remembered a night, weeks before the wedding, when she glimpsed a message glowing on Elijah's phone. 3 words that froze her. She can't know. She never asked. She forced herself to laugh, to believe, to silence the gnawing question in her chest. But that silence was about to rise louder than any vow spoken on that altar. If you've ever wondered whether secrets always find their way to the light, share this story now. Someone you know might be walking straight into the same darkness. The night before the ceremony, while the city outside pulsed with neon lights and restless traffic, Tasha sat in silence. The gown had been fitted, the flowers delivered, the hall prepared. Everything appeared in order, yet her heart felt unsettled, as though some unseen weight pressed against her chest. In her hands, she held the bridal veil, soft, delicate, white as snow. It should have symbolized purity, joy, beginnings. But to Tasha, it felt like a curtain. Not one she would walk through, but one that threatened to cover her eyes from truth she was not meant to see. It was late. the hour when laughter dies down and the night reveals what the day tries to hide. The house around her was still, but her phone broke the silence. A single vibration. A message. Her fingers trembled before she even read the words, as if her body knew what her mind did not. On the screen glowed a sentence that did not belong to her world of dreams, but to the world of secrets. Don't marry him. He's not who you think. No name, no number, only the warning. The room suddenly felt colder. Shadows seemed longer. Every laugh, every promise, every kiss with Elijah replayed in her head, but now each memory looked different, distorted, fragile. She stared at the message until the words blurred, but they did not vanish. They branded themselves into her thoughts. Tasha tried to reason. Maybe it was a cruel prank. Maybe it came from envy. But deep within her, beneath the layers of denial she had wrapped around herself for months, she knew. This was not random. This was not coincidence. This was the echo of something she had ignored too long. She remembered the nights Elijah returned later than promised. The hurried phone calls ended the moment she entered the room. The glance, just once, that he exchanged with someone across a dinner table, a glance too sharp to be accidental. She had buried each doubt, choosing silence over confrontation. Yet silence had only fed the truth, until it stood towering above her, undeniable. Her breath quickened, her palms grew damp. She wanted to call Elijah, to demand answers, but the clock mocked her. Midnight. What bride seeks out betrayal on the eve of her vows? What bride confronts her groom when the world is already dressed for their celebration? And yet what woman can close her eyes after reading words that cut through the veil of her life? Sleep did not come. Instead, Tasha sat by the window, watching the city move without her. Cars passed, lights flickered. Somewhere laughter rose from a group walking home. Life outside continued, blind to the storm gathering in her world. The phone remained on her lap. The screen dark, but the weight of that message heavier than any jewel she had ever worn. Hours slipped by, but her mind refused peace. She knew morning would bring the dress, the makeup, the guests, the vows. But morning would also bring the question, who was Elijah truly? And more haunting than that, who had sent the warning? Was it a stranger, a friend, or someone closer, someone who knew more than she was prepared to face? As the first hint of dawn began to seep through the curtains, Tasha realized one truth she could no longer avoid. Tomorrow would not just be a wedding, it would be a revelation. And though she could not yet name it, she felt the world around her bracing, as if waiting for a secret too heavy to remain hidden any longer. If you think betrayal could never enter your life, you're mistaken. Share this story now. Someone you know might already be living this moment in silence. Morning arrived not with joy, but with a weight that clung to Tasha's chest. The first rays of sunlight cut across the city like blades, sharp and unfeeling. While the streets outside bustled awake with ordinary life, inside the grand house chosen for her bridal preparations, everything carried the air of ceremony. Perfume drifted through the halls, dresses rustled against polished floors. Makeup artists whispered directions in hushed tones. To the world looking in, this was a bride's perfect morning, but Tasha could feel the fracture beneath the surface. Every brushstroke against her skin, every smile offered in the mirror, felt like a mask that covered not just her face, but the unease she could not silence. As she stood before the mirror in her gown, she looked at herself, the girl who had once been invisible to the wealthy, now draped in white satin, pearls resting like snow against her skin. She should have felt triumphant, but instead she felt small, as though the dress itself belonged to someone else. Voices drifted from the hallway. Elijah's relatives. Their words carried more sting than the perfume carried sweetness. She brings nothing. She has no name, no legacy, no fortune. She is a shadow wearing white. They did not whisper out of shame. They whispered because they believed she would never belong, no matter how perfect the gown, no matter how polished her smile. Tasha forced her shoulders to stay straight, her lips to hold their shape. She had endured whispers before. She had lived entire seasons of life being dismissed, overlooked, branded worthless. Yet something about today made those words cut deeper, because today she was expected to carry them before the world and call them her reality. Elijah arrived at the hall later than expected. His face was composed, but his eyes betrayed him. There was a flicker, a darting look that betrayed restlessness, almost panic, before it was smoothed away behind practiced charm. He greeted his parents with warmth, his friends with laughter, and then turned to Tasha with a smile too polished, too deliberate. For the guests, it was enough. For the photographers, it was perfect. But for Tasha, standing inches from him, it was hollow. She noticed the subtle things no one else cared to see. The way his hand lingered on his phone, slipping it into his pocket as though it had just delivered a message he did not want revealed. The way his gaze swept quickly across the hall, as though searching for someone, anyone, who did not belong. Every detail pressed harder against the memory of that midnight message. Don't marry him. He's not who you think. And yet, as guests began to arrive, as chauffeurs opened car doors and the wealthy stepped onto crimson carpets in gowns and jewels, the illusion was carefully maintained. Smiles bloomed, laughter echoed, and champagne was poured. None of them saw the fracture. None of them heard the silence screaming within her. To them, this was a union of power and elegance. To them, Tasha was the poor girl who had been lifted into a dream. To them, the whispers were entertainment, not warning. But to Tasha, every whispered insult, every flicker of unease in Elijah's eyes, every hidden message pulsing in her mind, all of it became a drumbeat, louder, faster, unrelenting. This was no longer just a wedding. This was the stage upon which truth itself prepared to step forward. And though she did not yet know how, Tasha felt it pressing closer, demanding to be seen. If you were standing in her shoes, dressed in white yet drowning in doubt, would you still walk forward? Tell me, what would you do? Comment below. The church doors opened, and the world seemed to still. Rows of guests rose to their feet as the music swelled, the organ's notes tumbling through marble arches and stained glass windows that painted the air with shards of light. Cameras lifted, eyes turned, whispers softened into silence. Tasha appeared, a figure of quiet grace, her veil catching the light like threads of fire. Every step was measured, yet inside, her chest thundered with a rhythm that refused to calm. To the crowd, she was radiant, walking toward destiny. To herself, she was walking into a storm she could neither see nor control. Elijah waited at the altar, his jaw set, his shoulders squared, his smile rehearsed. But even from across the aisle she could see it. His hands. They trembled, slightly, barely, but enough for her to know the mask was slipping. The guests, too blinded by the pageantry, missed it. They saw only the picture, the bride in white, the groom in black, the promise of union. They applauded softly as she reached him, their whispers carrying envy and awe. She must feel like a queen. Imagine being chosen. The priest began the ritual, his voice steady, his hands moving with the grace of long years. Words of love, of covenant, of eternal binding filled the hall. Yet as each sentence was spoken, Tasha felt the weight grow heavier, pressing against her chest until it was almost unbearable. And then, the moment came, the vows. The priest's voice lowered. Do you, Elijah, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Silence stretched. Elijah's lips parted, but no words came. His gaze dropped to the floor, then darted to the guests, then back to Tasha. The silence thickened, hanging in the air like smoke. A murmur stirred among the guests. Some shifted in their seats. Others exchanged glances. Tasha's heart pounded so loud she feared it might break through her chest. Finally, Elijah whispered, But but his voice cracked. The single syllable hung unfinished. And then, a voice cut through the silence, clear, sharp, accusing. "Tell her the truth, Elijah." The words exploded across the hall like thunder. Gasps followed, sharp intakes of breath that echoed against the cathedral walls. Heads whipped around, searching for the source. The organist froze mid-note, the melody collapsing into silence. Tasha's veil seemed suddenly heavier. Her body trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. She turned, scanning the crowd, but the figure who spoke remained hidden. Elijah's face drained of color. His eyes widened, then narrowed, as if he recognized the voice. His lips pressed together, his chest rising and falling too fast. The priest, unsettled but trying to maintain order, cleared his throat, urging calm. Yet the words were already out, their effect irreversible. The guests erupted in whispers. "Truth? What truth? Who said that?" Suspicion swept across the hall like wildfire. Elijah looked at Tasha. His mouth opened, but no explanation came. No reassurance, no denial. Only silence, louder than any confession. In that silence, the weight of the midnight message returned to Tasha's mind. "Don't marry him. He's not who you think." The warning was no longer a shadow. It was here, at the altar, demanding to be heard. And though the voice had fallen silent, its echo filled every corner of the cathedral. The ceremony had been broken, the illusion shattered. The truth, whatever it was about to step into the light. If this happened in front of your family, your friends, your entire world watching, what would you do? Would you run, confront, or stay silent? Comment your answer below. The whispers swelled until the hall itself seemed alive with suspicion. The priest's voice faltered, his words lost beneath the rising storm. Guests shifted uneasily, some leaning forward with curiosity, others shrinking back as if scandal might stain them if they were too close. Tasha stood motionless, her gaze fixed on Elijah. His lips trembled, his hand clenched tight at his side, his eyes darting across the crowd as though searching for an escape. For a heartbeat, he looked at her, really looked at her, and in that gaze she saw it. Guilt. Without a word she turned and walked. Not out of the church, but into the small chamber just beyond the altar, the place where priests kept sacred vessels, and couples sometimes sought a moment of prayer. The hush of her footsteps was deafening, every click of her heels echoing against the marble. Elijah hesitated, but the weight of the crowd's stares left him no choice. He followed. The door closed behind them, muting the restless murmur of the guests, leaving only silence between them. A silence so sharp it seemed to slice through the air. Tasha's hands trembled, but her voice did not. It came low, controlled, laced with a strength that surprised even her. "What truth?" Elijah's jaw tightened. He said nothing. She stepped closer, her veil brushing against his sleeve, her eyes locked onto his. "What truth, Elijah? Because someone knows something, and you look like a man who has run out of lies." He opened his mouth, but the words faltered. His chest rose and fell too quickly, his gaze falling to the floor. Finally, his voice emerged, a broken whisper. "It's not what you think." But the phrase, that tired defense, did not soothe her. It cut her deeper. Because she remembered the late nights, the unanswered calls, the message that haunted her phone. She remembered the way his family looked at her, with disdain, with mockery, as though they had always known she was walking blind into a fire. She pressed harder. "Then tell me what it is. Tell me before I walk back out there and end this myself." His hands shook. His lips parted again, and this time the words came with weight. "There are things about me you don't know, things I should have told you before all of this." Her heart pounded. She wanted to demand names, details, facts, but the fear in his eyes told her the truth would not come easily. Instead, Elijah reached for her hands as if to steady himself. His voice cracked. "I never meant for it to reach this point. I thought I could keep it hidden, that it would disappear before today. But it hasn't. And now everyone will know." Her fingers pulled away from his grasp. She felt cold, as though the walls themselves had turned against her. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the faint sound of the crowd seeped through the door, restless, whispering, waiting. Tasha lifted her veil from her face, her eyes steady, her voice calm but edged like steel. "Then I'll ask you one last time, Elijah. What truth are you hiding from me?" He looked at her, broken, cornered. His lips moved, but before the confession could leave them, the door creaked open, and in the sliver of light from the hall beyond, someone was watching. "If you were standing behind that door, hearing every word, would you step in or stay hidden? Tell me in the comments." The door cracked wider, and the faint shuffle of feet betrayed the presence of another. Tasha froze, her breath caught, her eyes snapping toward the light spilling into the chamber. Elijah turned, his face paling, as though the very walls had betrayed him. There she was, Jade. She didn't rush in, she didn't speak. She only stood there, half hidden by the heavy wooden door, her expression unreadable, her eyes sharp, watching. It wasn't the curiosity of a guest who had stumbled in by mistake. No, this was different. The stillness of her stance, the way her gaze cut through the space like glass, it was the silence of someone who knew exactly why she was there. Tasha's heart thudded. For a brief, dizzying second, she wondered if Jade was simply a stranger, some guest she hadn't noticed before. But then she saw the flicker of recognition in Elijah's eyes. Not confusion. Recognition. He knew her. And that was enough to unravel everything. Tasha's voice, though low, carried the weight of thunder. "Who is she?" Elijah said nothing. His lips parted, but the words betrayed him by refusing to come. He looked at Jade, and in that silent exchange, an entire truth seemed to hang unspoken between them. Tasha turned her gaze back to Jade. "Answer me," she demanded, her tone steady, her body trembling beneath the surface. "Who are you?" Finally, Jade stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The door shut behind her with a dull thud that seemed to seal the three of them in a cage of secrets. She didn't flinch beneath Tasha's glare. She didn't shrink from the confrontation. Instead, her voice was calm, cool, measured. "I should have been the one standing beside him today." The words struck Tasha harder than any blade. They echoed through her bones, sharp and undeniable. Her stomach churned, her breath quickened, yet she forced herself to stay upright, to stare at Jade with unwavering defiance. Elijah closed his eyes. The weight of the confession he could not give had been ripped from his silence by someone else. And in that moment, the man who had promised forever looked smaller than he ever had before. Jade didn't stop. She stepped closer, her tone sharpened, as if each word had been waiting years to surface. "You were never supposed to be here, Tasha, not in this dress, not in this moment. You were always the interruption." The chamber fell into a stillness so thick it threatened to suffocate. Tasha's hands curled into fists, her knuckles pale against the fabric of her gown. She whispered, though the sound carried like thunder, "Then tell me why. Tell me why you're here, why you waited until now." Jade's lips curved into something between a smirk and a scorn. Because secrets never stay buried, and today was the day his would finally catch up to him. The walls seemed to close in. The muffled noise of the guests outside grew distant, like the hum of another world. In this small chamber, three souls stood in collision, bound together by betrayal, secrets, and a truth still unfinished. And then, Jade's eyes shifted, from Tasha to Elijah. Her expression hardened. "Should I tell her, Elijah, or will you?" His silence was answer enough. The weight of the room pressed tighter. Tasha's voice broke through, shaking but fierce. "Tell me now, both of you, because if you don't, I will walk out there and let them all know what kind of man stands at this altar." But still, Elijah hesitated, and Jade only stared, as though waiting to see how much more he could lose before the truth finally shattered free. If Jade were about to reveal something devastating, would you want her to speak, or would you rather hear it from Elijah first? Comment below with what you'd demand. Elijah's chest rose and fell in uneven bursts, his silence slicing deeper than any answer. Tasha stood rigid, her nails digging into her palms, her eyes locked on him, unrelenting. The seconds stretched, unbearable, each one heavier than the last. Jade tilted her head slightly, a cold patience in her gaze. She wasn't in a hurry. She had all the time in the world. And the longer Elijah hesitated, the more she seemed to savor the unraveling of his composure. Finally, his voice broke through. Fragile, unsteady. Tasha, there are things I never told you, things I thought I could leave behind, but they don't stay buried. Tasha's lips tightened, her jaw quivering though she held her ground. What things, Elijah? Say it. Don't circle it. Tell me now. His eyes flickered toward Jade, then back to the woman in front of him, the woman he had vowed to love moments earlier. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, fighting against words that seemed to claw their way up with reluctance. Before you, before us, I was with her. He nodded toward Jade, his eyes dropping to the floor, unable to withstand the storm building in Tasha's gaze. And it wasn't casual. It wasn't meaningless. The air stilled. Tasha's heart slammed against her ribs. Her voice emerged sharp, trembling. How long? The question struck him like an arrow. He hesitated, then forced it out. Years, before you came into my life, and even after you did, it wasn't entirely over. Her body stiffened. She blinked once, twice, as though each word had struck her harder than the last. Her chest rose sharply, breath trembling, yet her feet refused to move. Elijah stepped closer, desperation cracking through his voice. I ended it, Tasha. I did. But endings aren't always clean. Sometimes they follow you. And she... Jade cut in, her voice sharp as a blade. He didn't end anything. He paused. And when he chose you, it wasn't because he wanted you more. It was because you were easier to parade before the world. Tasha's hands shook violently now, though she tried to hide it at her sides. Her eyes burned, her breath quickened, but still she whispered, Tell me she's lying, Elijah. Tell me she's twisting this. His silence was louder than thunder, and that was all the answer she needed. Her knees wavered, but she straightened herself, forcing strength into limbs that threatened to collapse. The truth cut through her chest, sharp and merciless, but she refused to let Jade see her crumble. So I was never enough, she whispered. Elijah shook his head violently, stepping toward her, his voice breaking. No, Tasha, that's not it. I love you. I chose you. Everything else was a lie, Jade finished, her tone bitter, her stare unblinking. The chamber felt colder now, the air itself heavy with betrayal. Outside, laughter and music carried on, unaware of the storm that had erupted just beyond their sight. And in that small space, 3 lives dangled at the edge of collapse, each one waiting for the next word to decide what would remain and what would shatter. If you were standing where Tasha stands now, would you walk away immediately, or would you force Elijah to explain everything in full detail? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what you would do. Tasha's hands trembled at her sides, but her voice, though fragile, held steady. She had heard enough to wound her deeply, but not enough to satisfy the gnawing ache for the full truth. Her eyes glistened, yet no tear was allowed to fall. She would not give either of them that victory. Elijah reached for her hand, desperate, pleading, but she pulled back with a sharp movement, her breath catching in her throat. For the first time that night he seemed to realize he was no longer the groom standing proudly before his bride. He was the accused, standing before a jury of 1. Jade leaned casually against the wall, her eyes burning with satisfaction. She had no need to rush. She could see the unraveling in Tasha's expression, the fracture widening with every second. Tasha's voice cracked the silence, low but firm. "How long after we were together did you still see her?" Elijah's throat tightened, his lips parted, then sealed again. Every hesitation screamed louder than words. Finally, with a trembling breath, he confessed, "Months after. I told myself it was over, but—" The rest of his sentence died in the air. Tasha's knees weakened, her body swaying slightly, as though the ground itself betrayed her. She steadied herself against the edge of the table, gripping it so hard her knuckles whitened. Her whisper came slow, each syllable heavy. "You married me while your heart still lived with her." The truth echoed in the chamber, bouncing off the stone walls like a curse spoken aloud for the first time. Elijah's eyes welled, his mouth trembling as if begging for forgiveness, but his words faltered, too late. And Jade, oh Jade, her laughter slithered into the silence, quiet at first, then louder, each note more cruel than the last. "You thought you were the prize, Tasha, but he never let me go. Not really. You wore the dress, you got the vows, but the pieces of him that mattered were still mine." Tasha's eyes snapped to her, burning with fury. For the first time that night, anger replaced heartbreak. Her voice rose, no longer shaking. "If he was still yours, why crash this wedding? Why show up now of all days?" Jade's smirk deepened, her gaze cutting sharp. "Because you needed to know the truth. Because I won't stand in shadows while someone else wears the crown I carved. You don't understand, Tasha. This was never about love. This was about possession, and the man you thought was yours, he belongs nowhere. Not to you, not to me, not even to himself." The words hung heavy, poisoning the air. Elijah pressed his palms to his face, shaking his head violently, mumbling, No, that's not true." But his denial fell hollow, drowned beneath the weight of what had already been revealed. Tasha's chest heaved, 1,000 thoughts colliding inside her. She could walk away, she could scream, she could tear everything down around them. And yet she stood frozen, paralyzed at the threshold between love and betrayal, between endurance and destruction. Outside the door, faint echoes of clinking glasses and laughter from unsuspecting guests carried in, mocking the pain seething within this chamber. The world celebrated, blind to the fact that the union at its center was already crumbling before their eyes. And then, Tasha did something none of them expected. She straightened. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes, though wet, sharpened. Her trembling stopped. She was no longer the wounded woman. She was something colder, steadier. Her voice cut through the room, quiet but deadly clear. "If neither of you can give me the truth, then I will take it for myself. And when I do, I won't be the one broken." The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Elijah's mouth parted, desperate to speak, but no words came. Jade's smirk faltered for the first time, just slightly, her eyes narrowing with the first shadow of doubt. Because in that moment, it was no longer Elijah's betrayal that carried the weight. It was Tasha's silence, her resolve, the storm she was preparing to unleash. Do you think Tasha should confront Elijah's family right here, exposing everything in front of the wedding guests? Or should she wait, gathering her own evidence to destroy him when he least expects it? Comment below what you would do. The silence inside the chamber pressed like stone against the chest, suffocating, until a sudden sound shattered it. A knock, 3 sharp raps on the heavy door, a muffled voice followed. "Mr. Elijah, the guests are asking for you. They're waiting for the dance." Elijah's face drained pale. His hand twitched toward the door, but Tasha's stare pinned him in place. She shook her head once, firm, her eyes glowing with something fierce, something unbending. The knock came again, more insistent this time. On the other side, music still drifted, soft, joyous, a cruel reminder of the illusion the guests still believed in. But illusions never last long. Inside, Tasha inhaled deeply, her chest rising, steadying herself. She turned, for the first time since the confrontation began, toward the door. Her voice, calm even, cut across the room. "Open it." Elijah blinked. "Tasha, no." But she did not repeat herself. She stepped past him, her hand on the cold brass handle, and pulled. The door groaned open, and with it, the outside world bled in. A handful of curious faces stared back. Family, friends, bridesmaids, groomsmen, all dressed in their finest, smiles faltering as they caught sight of what stood inside. Jade leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, her smirk now sharper, deadlier, as if she welcomed the audience. Elijah, pale and trembling, and Tasha, framed in the doorway, her gown glimmering under the lights, but her expression, stone, fierce, unreadable. Gasps whispered through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Who's that woman?" Another hissed, "Isn't that Jade?" The name rippled like wildfire. Faces shifted, shocked, confused, suspicious. Elijah stepped forward, hands raised slightly, his voice desperate. "Everyone, please, just give us a moment." But Tasha's voice rose, clear, carrying down the hall. "No, let them see, let them hear. There will be no more secrets tonight." Her words silenced the corridor. Guests froze, the music in the hall beyond still playing faintly, now sounding haunting, mocking. Jade tilted her head back, laughing low, her voice dripping venom. "Finally, the audience this deserves." Elijah spun toward her, his face twisted with panic. "Jade, stop. Don't do this." But it was too late. Whispers grew into murmurs, murmurs into questions. The guests stepped closer, hungry for truth, for scandal, for the drama unraveling before them. Tasha lifted her chin, her voice cutting like a blade. "Tell them, Elijah. Tell your family, your friends, these witnesses to our vows, what you were doing while planning this wedding." His mouth opened, closed. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, eyes darting desperately across the faces before him. His silence screamed louder than words ever could. Jade stepped forward, her smile radiant, triumphant. "Since he won't, I will. You see, while he was promising her forever, he was still with me, sneaking, lying, building his empire of deceit. This fairy tale wedding, built on betrayal." The crowd erupted, gasps, whispers, even cries. One of the bridesmaids covered her mouth, eyes wide. An older relative shook her head, muttering, "I knew something was wrong." Elijah's parents stepped forward, their faces pale, furious. His father's voice boomed, "Is this true, Elijah?" The groom's lips trembled, his hands shaking. He tried to speak, but nothing came. His silence was an answer in itself. Tasha stood there, watching the man she loved disintegrate before everyone. Her heart cracked, yes. But beneath it, a new steel formed. She was no longer the victim. She was the witness, the judge, and perhaps soon the executioner of this farce. The room, once filled with joy, now swirled with chaos. Guests demanded answers, some whispering in pity, others in scandalized delight. The wedding, that picture-perfect celebration, had become a stage of betrayal unveiled, and at the center stood three figures locked in a deadly triangle: the betrayed bride, the guilty groom, and the vengeful mistress, while the world watched. If you were Tasha, would you stop the wedding immediately in front of everyone, or would you wait until the very last vow to deliver your revenge? Comment below with what you would do in her place. The hall was no longer a sanctuary. It was a courtroom, a stage, and a battlefield all at once. The whispers of the guests hung like smoke, thick and suffocating, refusing to clear. And yet, as if nothing had happened, the organ began to play again. The cue for the vows. The priest, unsettled but bound to duty, stepped forward, his voice quivering but formal. "Let us continue. Marriage is sacred before God. If there is anyone here who has reason these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now, or forever hold your peace." The words echoed like thunder. The silence that followed was not peace. It was terror, anticipation. Every guest turned toward Tasha. Her hands trembled, but not from weakness, from power. She glanced at Elijah. His eyes pleaded, begging silently, "Please, don't." Jade smirked, her lips curving upward, as if savoring the inevitable collapse. Tasha took a single step forward, the sound of her heel against the marble floor cutting sharper than any blade. Her voice, clear, unwavering, "I have a reason." Gasps rippled through the crowd like a storm. The priest froze. His Bible trembled in his hands. The bridesmaids stared wide-eyed, the groomsmen shifted uneasily, and Elijah's parents went pale. The groom himself? He looked as if the ground beneath him had collapsed. Tasha continued, her words ringing across the hall. "This man standing before you is no groom, no husband-to-be. He is a liar, a deceiver. He asked for my hand while keeping another woman in his bed. He promised me forever while sneaking back to his past." Every word landed like a stone. Guests gasped, some clutching their pearls, others whispering frantically, leaning toward one another. And then she pointed, slowly, directly at Jade. She was there, on the night of the rehearsal, on the nights before, even today, in this very building. Tell me, how can a man who cannot honor truth at the altar honor vows before God? Jade tilted her head back, laughing. "Finally, you've grown a spine." Elijah's knees buckled, his voice breaking. "Tasha, please, this isn't how it looks." But she cut him off, her voice shaking with fury. "Don't you dare insult me with more lies. Don't you dare." The crowd was no longer silent. They murmured loudly, their voices clashing, some in pity, some in shock, some even in satisfaction at seeing the mighty brought low. The priest, pale and sweating, tried to intervene. "My children, perhaps this is best settled." But the ceremony was already in ruins. Tasha's eyes welled with tears, not of weakness, but of resolve. She stepped back from the altar, shaking her head. Her gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers, but now it looked less like a bridal dress and more like the robe of a judge delivering a sentence. "I will not marry you, Elijah. Not today. Not ever. This wedding is over." Her words echoed like a gavel strike. Elijah's mother gasped, covering her mouth. His father stepped forward, anger blazing in his eyes, shame hanging like a noose around his neck. Guests rose to their feet in disbelief. The music had stopped. The flowers, the decorations, the feast, all meaningless now. And at the center of the destruction, Tasha stood tall. The bride who chose truth over illusion. The groom who crumbled under the weight of his own deceit. And the mistress who smiled as though the chaos was a victory she had long waited for. The wedding had collapsed, not with whispers, but with fire. If you were in Tasha's shoes, would you have walked away at the vows like she did, or would you have gone further, exposing every dirty detail to humiliate him beyond repair? Comment below, because your answer might reveal what kind of justice you believe in. The altar stood empty now. The vows had shattered, the priest's voice silenced, the guests restless and confused. The bride was gone. Tasha had vanished from the hall without a word. Some believed she had run away in shame, fleeing the humiliation. Others whispered she would never recover, that her absence was her surrender. But then, minutes later, every whisper died. The doors of the grand hall burst open. And there she was, no longer in the soft white gown that once symbolized innocence and trust. Now she stood framed by the doorway, in a dress unlike anything the guests had ever seen, deep, blazing red, a crimson that devoured the chandelier's light and set her apart from the sea of pale faces. Her veil was gone. Her makeup, smeared by tears, was now sharper, fiercer, framed by resolve. Every step she took down that aisle was deliberate, heels striking the marble like the sound of a war drum. Gasps filled the air, the whispers turned to roars. And at the altar, Elijah's face crumpled in disbelief. The groom who once stood tall now looked like a man awaiting his sentence. Jade folded her arms, her smirk faltering for the first time. Even she hadn't expected this. The guests leaned forward, their eyes wide. Some clutched their phones, secretly recording. Others stood frozen, afraid to even breathe. Tasha's voice rang out, sharp and steady. White was meant for purity, but today purity is dead. Red is for truth, red is for fire, and red is for the blood of every promise you killed. Her words carved into the silence. Every eye followed her as she ascended the steps to the altar. She did not tremble. She did not falter. She stood before Elijah, her crimson dress blazing like a flame against his black tuxedo. He stuttered, his lips searching for words that would not come. "Tasha, please, don't do this." But she already had. She raised her hand, not to strike but to silence, and silence obeyed. "This wedding is no longer yours. It is mine, my stage, my ending. And I choose not despair, not shame, but revelation." Her eyes swept across the room, burning into every guest. "Look at him. Look closely. This is the man who wore vows like a mask, who kissed one woman while holding another, who asked me to share a future while burying his past in deceit. This is the man I was meant to call husband, and this is the man I choose to leave behind." A murmur rippled through the crowd, not of gossip now, but of awe. She did not cry, she did not plead, she declared. Then, slowly, deliberately, she slipped the engagement ring from her finger. She held it up high, letting the chandeliers catch its sparkle one last time before she let it fall. The ring clattered against the marble floor, the sound echoing louder than the organ, louder than applause, louder than any vow could ever be. It was the sound of freedom. Elijah staggered, his knees trembling. His hands reached out, but she stepped back, her crimson dress flowing like fire around her. And then she turned. She walked away, not hurried, not broken, but steady. Every guest parted for her like the sea, eyes locked, breaths held. Some bowed their heads in respect. Some even clapped softly, timidly, as if witnessing something holy. The bride in red had turned betrayal into triumph. She did not leave as a victim. She left as a force. And when the heavy doors closed behind her, the hall remained in stunned silence, as though history itself had just shifted. If you were in that hall, watching her return in red and shatter everything, would you have applauded her courage or judged her defiance? Tell me in the comments, because the line between justice and scandal is thinner than you think. The echo of those closing doors lingered longer than any vow. Inside that hall, the wedding had ended, but the story had only just begun. Elijah remained frozen at the altar, his hands trembling, his eyes darting between the fallen ring and the path Tasha had taken. The guests, unsure whether to stay seated or leave, whispered in voices that carried like thunder. "Did you see her dress? She looked like a queen." "No, like judgment itself." And Jade's smirk had vanished entirely. The woman who thought she had won suddenly felt smaller, diminished, standing in the shadow of the bride who had turned humiliation into legend. She reached for Elijah's arm, but he pulled away. His face twisted, not with anger, but with shame. For the first time, he looked not like a groom, not like a lover, but like a man utterly undone. Outside, Tasha walked alone. The night air was cool against her skin, carrying away the heat of the chandeliers, the gasps, the stares. Every step she took in that crimson dress left an imprint, not on the pavement, but on the memory of every witness inside. She was no longer the girl in white, waiting for promises. She was the woman in red, carrying her own story. And though the streets were empty, though no one followed her, she knew. Her act would never be forgotten. Because sometimes, weddings are not remembered for the vows spoken, but for the truths revealed. Days later, people still whispered. Some said Elijah fell into ruin, his reputation crumbling like the altar that once held him up. Others claimed Jade never showed her face again, haunted by the shadow of the woman she thought she defeated. But as for Tasha, no one knew exactly where she went. Some swore they saw her boarding a train, the crimson dress hidden beneath a dark coat. Others whispered she returned to her childhood home, her mother's embrace waiting in silence. Yet the truth was that she became something more than a woman scorned. She became a story, a warning, a legend told in hushed voices, the bride who returned in red. And in that legend, her pain did not define her. Her revenge did. Because while Elijah and Jade's names were forgotten, hers lived on. Tasha, the woman who walked away, but never bowed her head. And now I ask you, was Tasha's act the ultimate justice, or did she cross a line that turned her into something else entirely? Would you have walked away quietly, or would you have returned in red? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because her story may be over, but the debate has only just begun.